To say, was that the greatest flyover ever?
From flyovers to forever mortgages.
Is that really a good idea?
It's not even a big deal. I mean, you know, you go from 40 to 50 years, and what it means is you pay.
Tonight, Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries on the vote to end the shutdown.
These people are jokes. But the issue of the health care of the American people is very serious.
Then New Jersey Governor-elect Mikey Sherrill on where the fight goes from here. Plus,
are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein?
Ro Khanna on a new day for the Epstein files. And my interview with a swing state candidate who ran as a referendum against ICE and won.
We have one final opportunity to end this program once and for all, and that is by defeating Fred Horan on November 4th.
It All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. This time last week in this studio, we watched an election night in which Democrats rolled up Republicans everywhere in almost every race, statewide and local from coast to coast. That came just weeks after 7 million people took to the streets in 2,500 communities for the No Kings protests against Donald Trump. And all of this happened during the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, one the Trump administration has tried to use to gut the government at the expense of his approval numbers. Every political indicator had been moving in the Democrats' direction, which is what made accepting what happened over the weekend so difficult and so puzzling. As a group of 8 moderate Senate Democrats took the air out of their coalition sails by accepting a Republican deal to fund the government and to end the shutdown, a deal that could be approved by the House and signed into law by Trump as soon as tomorrow. And Democrats did not get the one thing they had focused their fight on, an extension to the Biden-era federal subsidies on Obamacare health plans, subsidies that will now expire at the end of the year, forcing big rises in insurance premiums for 20 million Americans. In fact, the emerging deal mirrors what Senate Majority Leader John Thune floated weeks ago during an interview with MSNBC. Reopen the government now, and Republicans will later give Democrats a vote on extending the expiring Affordable Care Act subsidies. Now, will that vote actually happen, you ask? Who knows? If it does happen, will enough Republicans vote to save the subsidies? Again, who knows? I'm skeptical. The deal does not look like what Democrats were fighting for, and that has left a lot of people very frustrated.
I don't see how a prerequisite for opening up the federal government is asking people's premiums to go up by 90%. And when we're talking about this deal, I'm not sure what deal we just cut.
The promise of a vote in the Senate, in my view, isn't really worth the paper it's written on.
What we lost in this vote is not only the suffering that's going to take place with people can't afford health care. You're going to have a president who says, see, I always told you, the Democrats are weak, and yes, I'm an authoritarian. I want more and more power, and you can't stop me.
And to be clear, the senators who took the deal, who's you could call them moderates, although it's kind of a strange group in some ways, they are doing, I gotta say, a uniformly terrible job of articulating why it had to be done and now.
There were 2 goals, both of which I support. One was standing up to Donald Trump. The other was getting some resolution on the ACA premium tax credit issue. The problem was the shutdown wasn't accomplishing either goals. Standing up to Donald Trump didn't work. It actually gave him more power.
I don't know about that. I think it's fair to say statements like that are pretty dispiriting, indeed enraging, to millions of people who marched last month and who voted on Tuesday. And they deserve a clear answer for why this is happening. I can think of one big reason that nobody's really made explicit yet, and it's kind of an underlying dynamic that has been true for the 20 years I've covered politics, which is this. Democrats, and particularly Democratic elected representatives in Congress, sincerely want the federal government to function for the American public, even when they're out of power. Republicans generally could kind of care less, particularly when it comes to like federal workers or SNAP recipients. It really is the case. This has been true in Washington through my whole career. It's, for instance, why I took Virginia Senator Tim Kaine, one of the Democrats who voted to fund the government, at his word when he said this yesterday.
I got the first good night's sleep last night that I've gotten since October 1, because I wasn't worried about being able to look Capitol Police in the eye when I walked in, or what a furloughed federal worker would say to me at church, or what somebody would say to me about their SNAP benefits.
I really don't think Senator Kane's lying. I don't think it's three-dimensional chess. I don't think it was a tactical decision about what would work for Virginia voters attacking the center. I think he just feels that way, that he cares about people getting their benefits. Now, throughout this shutdown, Trump and Republicans have come out and said they do not care. They do not care about the subsidies for an insurance program named after Barack Obama. They do not care about the 40 million plus Americans who rely on SNAP. They say SNAP's a Democratic program. In fact, the Trump administration went to court and fought with everything it had, way beyond what it had to do, to deny SNAP funds, $5 billion of which were just sitting in a contingency account that multiple courts said they had to spend. Right? This is the key. The Republican strategy throughout the shutdown, they've telegraphed it. Russ Vogt is Darth Vader, right? Has been, in their own words, to turn up the pain dial, is what they called it. To look for ways to make Americans hurt more, including trying to permanently lay off furloughed federal workers, fighting courts to avoid the food funding, crippling the country's air traffic control system on the eve of the winter holidays. And again, I think by and large, the public recognized this. I mean, Trump was kind of like alternating between blaming Democrats and like crowing about how mean he was going to be. And it's why Trump's approval ratings are down and Republicans just got shellacked. And I think it should be relatively easy for Democrats to tell this story if they had made this decision collectively. Basically something along the lines of, we were desperately trying to give Donald Trump and Republicans an opportunity to save themselves and help the American people by keeping their health care costs under control, to no political benefit by the way of our own, right? I mean, if you solve that issue, it's probably a little better for the Republicans. And we were holding together because we didn't want to pile misery on top of misery, and we thought this aim was both achievable and reasonable. But the Republican wrecking crew was holding millions of American lives and livelihoods hostage in increasingly dire conditions, and we're the only responsible party in Washington. We're the only ones that generally care about a government functioning for people. And so it came down to us. But it didn't really come down to us, right, in the Democrats' caucus, because it wasn't a unified decision. A splinter group made the calculation that the balance of pain was getting out of whack. And politically, it kind of sucks, because it does make Democrats look weak, or weaker than they looked before. I will say, it's not a small thing that people are now going to get their SNAP benefits, and federal workers are going to get their paychecks, including those air traffic controllers, that they rolled back some of the layoffs, that there's some language in the bill that's going to stop these reductions in forces. It's not nothing. It's a lifesaver for millions, particularly SNAP. I personally know people who've been working without a paycheck for 7 weeks. That matters. I also don't think this is a lasting political failure, right? I mean, people don't remember anything that happened like 2 weeks ago. Keep that in mind, right? When everyone says, oh, this is going to be a big thing in the midterms. The shutdown did put the ACA healthcare subsidies front and center in the national conversation, which was part of the tactical goal. It gave a voice to millions of Americans who are already seeing how their health insurance costs will rise. It highlighted that Republicans do not care about that. And also, and this is an important lesson, if you're the Democrats, and let's say you're a Democratic leader, elected leader watching this right now, you took a high leverage, relatively high risk strategy, and it actually paid pretty big political dividends before the more risk averse members of the caucus called it quits. But there's a lesson there, I think. Joining me now is House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries from New York's 8th Congressional District. Congressman, you will be back in session tomorrow. Mike Johnson has decided that he's going to call the House back into session. How will leadership be whipping votes on this vote to basically pass what the Senate passed, continuing funding to the government through January at current levels, and reopen the government?
Well, House Democrats will strongly oppose the bill that's come over from the Senate because we continue to make clear that we have to decisively address the Republican health care crisis. I'm thankful that Republicans have finally decided to end their 7+ week taxpayer-funded vacation, which was outrageous. They've been on the run, but they can no longer hide. And in just a few moments from now, myself and Catherine Clark will offer an amendment before the Rules Committee to change the bill so that it extends the Affordable Care Act tax credits for 3 years. And we're going to put Republicans on record they've been saying, many of them, for the last several weeks, that they actually do want to deal with this healthcare crisis situation, the fact that for tens of millions of people, their premiums, copays, and deductibles are about to skyrocket. These are working class Americans. But now we're going to force them to actually see, are they willing to do it, or will they continue to do the bidding of Donald J. Trump?
How did you hear about the Senate deal?
I think I learned about the Senate deal maybe an hour or two before it officially came together. And certainly I think there's a lot of disappointment as it relates to what those 7 or 8 Senate Democrats decided to do. I am thankful for what we've seen from Leader Schumer and the overwhelming majority of Senate Democrats who for 7+ weeks held the line and continued to stand against this Republican spending bill, because as we've indicated, we were not going to support anything that guts the health care of the American people. And as you've indicated also as well, Chris, over the last several weeks, we have elevated successfully the issue of the Republican health care crisis, and we're not backing away from it. We're going to press them tonight. We're going to press them on the House floor tomorrow, and we're going to continue to press them until these Affordable Care Act tax credits are extended.
I want to ask one more question just about the deal and how it came together. So, you know, legislative leaders like yourself, Senator Schumer, you're not people's boss, right? I mean, everyone's elected. They get to vote their conscience. You try to whip them, but they get to do what they want to do. But is it not an indictment of the minority leaders' leadership in the Senate if it's the fact that on something so high stakes and so high leverage, there's basically a breakaway caucus that hammers the deal out?
Well, it was my understanding that this was a somewhat rogue group of individuals in terms of how they approached this negotiation. And they broke away from the overwhelming majority of their colleagues, both progressive senators, and because it's out of control. And we know the cost of living in this country is out of control. And Republicans, these people, these extremists, they lied to the American people. They said they were going to lower costs on day one. But costs haven't gone down. They've gone up. Housing costs through the roof, grocery costs through the roof, utility bills, electricity prices through the bills, electricity prices through the roof. And now, because of their refusal to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, some instances we know that everyday Americans are going to experience insurance costs that increase by $1,000 or $2,000 per month. That is unsustainable. That's why we're in this fight, Chris, until we win this fight for the American people.
So I don't know if people quite have gotten their head around this. The bill that's going to be before the House that passed the Senate will extend funding through January. We're in the second week of November. That'll be here before you know it. So Laura Ingraham interviewed Donald Trump and asked basically, well, what's going to happen in January? I'll tell you what he had to say.
How do Republicans avoid this shutdown saga from reoccurring on January 30th when this deal ends?
Well, we're trying to put in a bill, as you know, the bill or a bill, that you can never do that again. You can't just shut down the government because you're trying to renegotiate a deal.
I don't think that's in the bill, and I don't think you could even. Do you even understand what he's talking about?
No, I have no idea what he's saying, and I don't think Donald Trump has any idea what he's saying either. But here's what I do know, is that the Affordable Care Act tax credits are going to expire on December 31st.
Right.
And so the Republicans are not going to be able to run away from this issue. We're in open enrollment right now. Tens of millions of people are seeing the reality that their premiums, copays, and deductibles are about to skyrocket. People are not going to be able to afford to go see a doctor when they need one. So this has been a very real fight for us as Democrats. And this affordability fight is going to continue. It's the reason why great candidates, my colleague, Mikey Sherrill, won a decisive victory in New Jersey and Abigail. We won in New York. We won in Pennsylvania. We won in Georgia. We won in Mississippi. We won in California. That's the momentum that will allow us to continue to stay in the fight, to lower the high cost of living, fix our broken healthcare system, clean up the corruption mess that Donald Trump and Republicans have created, and then go back and take control of the House of Representatives next November so we can start the process, Chris, of ending this national nightmare.
What do you say to people who, and I've seen a lot of people say this, that yes, Democrats won everywhere, coast to coast, small, swing counties and statewide elections, and they won because they were fighting. And then once they won, they stopped fighting. Why did they do that?
Well, that's a question really that the 8 or so Democrats in the Senate are going to have to answer. I can tell you that House Democrats are committed to fighting on all the things, fighting to make sure we push back against the extremism that Donald Trump has unleashed on the American people, fighting to make sure that we actually improve the quality of life of everyday Americans. We've said from the beginning, look, we want to find a bipartisan spending agreement approach that actually makes life better for working class Americans, that lowers the high cost of living, that improves their quality of life, that addresses the Republican health care crisis. These are reasonable things, but Republicans refuse to do anything about it. Why? Because these people, these extremists, they're only concerned with making life better for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. That's what their one big ugly bill was all about. They can't find a dime to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits for everyday Americans, middle-class Americans, and working-class Americans. But somehow, in the midst of this shutdown, they found $40 billion to bail out their right-wing dictator friend in Argentina. It's extraordinary. The American people see these extremists now for who they are. That's become even clearer over the last several weeks, and we're going to continue to wage this fight on behalf of the people we're privileged to represent.
Javier Milei in Argentina, whose party did just win a re-election in those elections, and who was elected to begin that term. Final question for you: Adelita Grijalva gets sworn in tomorrow. Everyone's back. Do you think that there's some bell that can't be unrung in terms of the constitutional structure of governance, vis-a-vis Mike Johnson just canceling the House for 8 weeks, like something that we've never seen before?
Yeah, it's extraordinary that, as you indicated, Mike Johnson did cancel the House for 8 weeks. They were missing in action, taxpayer-funded vacation. Some of them, were hiking in mountains and documented this. Others were traveling Europe. This is extraordinary stuff. But here's the thing, that basically House Republicans have canceled the Congress, the House of Representatives, since the very beginning of Donald Trump's presidency. These people don't function as a separate and co-equal branch of government. They are puppets to Donald Trump, who's their puppet master. When he says jump, they say how high. All they do is serve as a reckless rubber stamp to Donald Trump's extreme agenda. And the American people have had enough. They see it, and that's why. Thanks, Chris.
Still to come, what to expect when the House reconvenes and what it means for the release of the Epstein files. That's next.